Okay, so I'm starting recording. I'm gonna put this presentation full mode, full screen. All right, good. So we can start, I guess, right? So today we'll have a meeting on or a conversation discussion on chatbots, right, and smarter conversations in banking and insurance, and we'll do it a bit on an informal way because we have a smaller attendance, which is fine, which is great to have a conversation around that topic. So let me go through some slides first, and then later on we'll go through some experiments that will help maybe understand what we can do with natural language processing in the context of chatbots. By the way, I'm gonna refer to some articles that I've written on Medium regarding Spacey, for example, and regarding experiment I've done on AWS and Azure. And also there's a little video on YouTube that you can check that is showing a chatbot for banking onboarding. There's somebody that is not on mute, so maybe can you put yourself on mute because yeah. Okay, thank you. All right. So what is the agenda today? So we'll go through a little bit of background. What are the challenges with virtual assistants in regulated industries? Then we'll go through some experiments, sorry, that I've done using Spacey. I'll come back to that. Then we'll show you a small experiment that we've done with AWS Lex and also Azure. And then we'll go through some concluding remarks. And obviously, please feel free to ask any question you have during the presentation. Hopefully, we can make it a little bit interactive since we have like less than 10 people attending the meetup. All right. So what are the challenges when developing chatbot or virtual assistant in financial services? Yeah, first of all, we don't have a large data sets, right, that we could use to train our chatbot, right? Usually the conversations between the bankers and clients or insurers and clients, right, they are quite confidential, right, and we cannot find them in the public. So that's a major challenge. Second thing, there are obviously data privacy issues for training. All the conversations between bankers, customers are quite private and confidential, and can include a lot of private data. So this is something that represents a further challenge. Then we are also looking at a very narrow, specific domain, right? If we think about banking, opening an account, that's very narrow, right? That's not something you can learn from wiki pages or anywhere else. Same thing if you want to ask for an insurance policy, or you want to insure your car or insure your house and things like that. This is a very narrow and specific business domain. And finally, it's strongly regulated. So, which means that if you have a virtual assistant, it needs to be controlled. You cannot propose or recommend any kind of product to a bank customer. Same thing for an insurance customer. There are strong regulations. For example, you cannot propose to an account to somebody that is less than 18 years old. For example, this is one of the simplest examples. We have others, right? So, which means we are facing multiple challenges in the financial services. First of all, I would like also to present the types of virtual assistants, right? Because when we speak about chatbots, everybody understands something different. But there are many different types of chatbots or assistants. One is the simplest form of chatbot. It's a chit chat chatbot that is kind of trying to replicate some kind of natural conversation. So like, how are you? I'm fine. What's the weather like? Or what is your preferred movie and things like that, right? This kind of chatbot has been trained on large data sets like Wikipedia or movie dialogues or things like that, right? It's working fine, but it's not very useful in our case. Then we have what we call button-based chatbots, which are very primitive. They are not really chatbots, right? The only thing they can do, they propose you with a menu, and you can then select from the menu what you want to do. If you want to order something or get your order status, cancel your order. So there's not really a conversation with the chatbot. It's basically just replacing a form on the screen, right? That I guess most of the chatbots that you can see today in insurance, banking, and other industries are button-based chatbots, at least from my personal experience. Then we have general Q&A chatbots where you can ask questions and then the chatbot would answer, right, on specific domains, for example, a history, or when was the French Revolution, and then it should answer hopefully 1789, who was the first US president, and so on and so forth, right? So this is again something that we can find quite often, but obviously we cannot use that in our case either, right? Then we have chatbots that are based fully on machine learning, right? They are trained on large data sets. They are using the latest advances in natural language processing like GPT-3. This is quite impressive because the chatbot can even generate conversations, right, based on previous conversations. But again, right, since we are in financial services in regulated industries, we cannot use something that we cannot control really, right? So this is fun for research, right, but difficult to apply for our case. And then we have a hybrid type of chatbots. So this is basically using some natural language processing, right, to detect what the client wants to do. For example, we come back to that, and rules, business rules. For example, like I said earlier, right, you have to ask somebody if he's more than 18 years old, and that's a rule that if he's less than 18 years old, you cannot really continue the conversation. So we have a mix of rules and a mix of statistical models or natural language processing models. Any remark or question so far? Okay, so what is the typical dialogue system architecture or chatbot architecture? So mainly, first of all, it could be a speech based chatbot, so with some speech recognition, so a voice chatbot basically, or it can be a text chatbot. We will not speak about automatic speech recognition today, but let's assume we could have one. There are quite a few that are working quite well. Then once we have the text from the customer's input, we will have some kind of natural language understanding module, right? That will try to identify the words and the sentences and the meaning of the intent or of the sentence that the customer is trying to tell us. One main component of the chatbot is the dialogue manager, which means that the dialogue manager needs to really keep track of where we are in the current conversation, keep track of the context. For example, if the chatbot asks the person who is interacted with him, what's your name? For example, Patrick, we don't want to ask the name 2 times, 3 times. So we need to keep the context of the conversation somewhere. And we can keep it within a so-called dialogue manager. So it can be a simple Python program or whatever else, right? So, but it needs to be kept somewhere. And then we may have a backend where we can, for example, query some data or store some data, or call some web service for further action. And then the idea is to come back to the customer with some natural language generation. In our case, it will be a simple selection of replies that the chatbot has to send to the user. All right, so let's go to some fun part of the discussion today. I wanted to show you a little bit how we could develop a chatbot using Spacy. Spacy is a Python library for natural language processing. Spacy it can use different pre-trained models. So that have been trained, for example, on Wikipedia or others. You can choose which one is the best for your use case, right? You can use also transformer models, which are much more accurate, but much slower and much bigger. But basically, it will help us to identify entities, words, verbs, and so on and so forth. We'll see that in the example later on. So we'll look at two examples. One, for example, one to open an account, right? Let's assume I'm writing a mail, I'm writing something in a chatbot, or I'm calling a voice system, and I'm going to say that I'm interested to open an account. And the other example we go through is the example of submitting a claim to an insurance, for example, for a car accident. So let's go through, let me see if I can go through some example here. All right, so this is the insurance example I wanted to show you. So in Python, maybe some of you are not familiar with Python, but it's not so difficult to learn, by the way. But okay, this is a simple notebook. You can see here that we are reading a simple file where I have a simple start of the dialogue. Hello, I would like to submit a claim for my car accident, send you a picture. How should I proceed, right? So what we can do with Spacy is first process this text. So let's process it. And then try to find entities in the text. Entities are predefined words that the system has been trained to detect, right? So for example, persons, organizations, companies, and things like that. So you can see that in this case, the system has just been able to identify Patrick as a person. That's already good, but that's really not enough, right? So we can also, by the way, look at the at this graphically. So you can see here that in this sentence, the system has detected Patrick as a person. Now, since the model has been trained on a very generic set of data, probably Wikipedia or others, right? We need to make the model a bit more business specific. I'm sorry about that. Just an interruption here. All right, thank you. Sorry. Okay, let me come back. So what we do will instill some business rules in the model. For example, we want to detect claim automatically. We want to detect the word accident automatically and classify these words, right? We know that, for example, accident is a damage type. We know that the claim has to do with the insurance. We know that the car is an object that has been insured, for example. So we are adding those patterns to the model to recognize more entities. So let's do that. And now if I do the same thing as I did before, I process the text, and we can see that not only we detected Patrick as a person, but we can detect more entities, right? So this allows us to make the model a bit more business specific. All right. We can do the same with not only words, but sentences or phrases. So we can also match full phrases and say, okay, I want to detect car accident as an entity. So we can imagine that if you detect car accident in a dialogue, then based on that, you would take a number of actions, for example, asking the client to send you a picture or things like that. It can be also a fire in the house. It can be a flood in the house, and depending on the entities we've detected in the text, we can then take different actions. And the dialogue manager, which means this Python notebook in this case, would ask the client to give more details. All right. Now we can also go a little bit deeper and analyze the full text and try to understand, go a little bit deeper into understand the meaning of the text. And for that, Space is able to do part of speech tagging, which means identifying verbs, nouns, adjectives, and so on and so forth. So if we do that live, then you can see that, for example, accident is a noun, submit is a verb. Yeah. So we have also different types of classification. I don't want to go too much into details here. And the nice thing here, we can see the decomposition of the sentence with a part of speech. So, for example, you can see the car accident, right? This is compound, so they go together. Then if you look at the various verbs, for example, like is a verb, right? That is linked to the verb submit, and then submit would have an object somewhere here, right? Claim is a direct object of the verb submit. So this will help us to interpret what the client wants to say, right? I don't have the full dialogue here, but I'm just showing some examples how to use spaCy to manage the dialogue, for example. Yeah. We can also try to identify the action verbs in the sentence. So here we can see that in the same sentence we have submit, send, like, and proceed. So quite a number of different verbs. So how do I know that the client wants to submit something, right? So what we can do is try to do a comparison with verbs I know. In this case, I want to compare to the verb notify and to compare to the verb cancel. And then based on the input, I will choose the verb that is closest to notify. So I will compare it, right, using vectors. In this case, the words are represented by vectors, and the higher the similarity figure, the closest the words are in terms of meaning, right? So in this case, the verb submit, right, is closer to notify than to the verb cancel, right? So that's interesting because then we can assume that the client in this case, or the user, wants to notify something, right? Notify us about something. And the same thing, we want to understand what the user wants to submit, right? What is it? Is it a claim or something else? So we have to find potential direct objects for the verb submit, and so on and so forth. So I guess you have understood the mechanic. Any questions so far?
That means basically that these chatbots are really targeted for very specific questions, like claims in this case. How do they react if the user asks something random? What's the last president of the United States? Or
Yeah,
what's the
exactly.
meaning of life, or whatever stupid thing like that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because in fact, this is, I can show it in the in this example later, right? But that's exactly what we were trying to implement when we did this experiment, right? To have a chatbot that is as natural as possible, meaning that in the middle of a conversation, suddenly you could ask about the weather, right? Because our conversations, natural conversations, are not always logical and sequential, right? You can suddenly change subject and come back, and this is quite difficult if first you don't maintain the context, right, of what you've discussed before, right? And second, you need to be prepared, right, for exceptional cases, right? So this is the difficulty to implement such chatbots that look natural, Michel. I don't have the exact answer, right? But this is a very challenging question. Yeah. But thanks for the question, because in fact, I will come back to that a bit later. Yeah. So if I take a banking example, right? That's, I don't want to go through the whole thing again, right? But what is interesting, you can also say, how should I say that? Okay, my intent, original intent, if I go back here, sorry, I will tell the chatbot, or I will call, like I said, the virtual assistant, and I'm going to say I'm interested to open a trading account, right? So I don't want to click on anything. I just want to speak to a virtual assistant, and then the virtual assistant should detect automatically that I'm interested to open an account, right? One way to do that is to find similar phrases that I know, right? To try to guess what the user wants to say, right? And here I'm just showing that we can compare the original intent from the user with some predefined sentence that we know, right? So for example, I'm comparing, I want to open an account, with the sentence I've put at the beginning, which is, I want to open a trading account, right? So which is very similar, but not exactly the same. So if I compare the two, I get a similarity of 0.88. I cannot explain the whole background of that calculation, but let's assume it's right. Now, luckily, if I compare to, I want to close my account, it's less similar that I want to open an account, right? So you see the difference is not so big, because there are quite a number of words that are similar, except one, which is open against close. So what I wanted to show here is that this is still extremely difficult to distinguish between different sentences that are absolutely not saying the same thing, but that differ only by one word, right? And that's the interesting part of all this, right? Now, if I say the weather is beautiful today, we can see that the sentence, I want to open a trading account, is not really very similar to the weather is beautiful today, or to I want to close the window. So luckily, we can see there's some logic here, right? I want to open a trading account is similar to open an account, and less similar to I want to close my account, or to the weather is beautiful today, right? So all this, we don't need to program all this to develop a chatbot, by the way, because if I go to Amazon or Azure or others, right, they have all the framework that would help to program all this. I just wanted to show a little bit of the mechanics that are running behind the scene. Any question to that? All right. So if I go now to a small example that we've developed together with Jorge on Amazon Lex, the idea was, like you said, Misha, right, was to be able to jump from one conversation to another, keeping the context, and that's very difficult. So we didn't implement this idea fully, right? But it was an attempt to make the dialogue as natural as possible, right? Keeping always the context ready and be able to jump from one state to the other. So, but let me go back to my to my presentation here, because I want to explain something before. Before that, I wanted to show you a little bit about the architecture itself. Some architecture choices are quite important, because depending on which library you use, or depending on if you use Azure or AWS, you might get totally different results, because it pretty much depends where the models have been trained, right? So you can see here a small example here. I've taken a text, do some analysis. If I take spaCy version 2.3.30 or take Azure Text Analytics API 3.0, I get different results, right? And even it doesn't detect the same occurrences of the same word. So architecture decisions made at the beginning of a project have a big impact on the outcome.
Why are these words so different, which they show here for these different versions?
Yeah, okay. This is quite interesting, because here, I don't know exactly why, but if you see, this is the same text, right? But with version 2.3, EU was like the most frequent entity, right? And then here, EU doesn't even appear, right? Which is quite interesting. Yeah. So the idea here is to say that you need to experiment quite a number of different libraries to see which one fits better, right?
Could that become a science, like, you know, Google search results, search engine optimization, or something like that? Yeah. Where you could say, hey, you need special agencies and whatever attributes in your overall architecture or so. So yeah, your terms are recognized better or found better.
Yeah. Yeah, but you see, what is interesting here is that, for example, spaCy 2.3, right, has detected EU, right, as a most frequent entity in this particular text. I can't remember. It was an article about EU regulations on AI, I believe, right, something like that. And then the Azure Text Analytics API, right, which probably doesn't use spaCy, or maybe yes, I don't know, but it has also detected EU as the most frequent entity. But then it diverges, right? Here you have no InsurTech, and here you have InsurTech, and so on. So yeah, you use Azure, you get the result. You use AWS, you will get another one, and you use spaCy, you will get another one. So yeah, you have to find which one is best, right?
How do you define best?
Yeah, or the one that satisfies your your expectations, let's say, right? Because yeah. So if I go quickly, all right, I don't want to be too long, but quickly on this. So this is AWS Select, sorry. Instead of writing a full program, right, that is detecting all the entities and the slots and everything, you can you can define that in a nice GUI, right? Yeah. There's something similar in Google and Microsoft Azure, by the way, so just a little bit different. So what you do, basically, you define different intents, and then you give in some examples of the sentences that you should detect, a bit like we did earlier in our Python program. So for example, you said, I'm interested in an account, I want a new account, blah, blah, blah. Then this would detect that you looking to open a new account, for example. Yeah? And then based on that, it will give you a reply, keep the context, and go to the next question or the next sequence in the dialogue. So here I have done a little example of a dialogue where I say, okay, I want a new account. So it goes here, detects that you have a new account. Then it asks you, okay, are you a country resident or national? And so on and so forth. So the idea is a bit the same, but you need to still keep the context. And in AWS, you can do that using so-called lambdas. So these are serverless function where you can keep some, you can write them in Python, and you can implement your dialog manager here, right? Keeping the session attributes here, for example. Right? So if you ask somebody, are you a resident or national, you want to keep that in as a context, right? For the next step, and you can do that in AWS using so-called session attributes. All right. I think we've gone through the main part of the presentation. Okay, what we have done also later on was to integrate this chatbot with a product recommender. That means that based on the answers given by the potential client, we would propose some banking product. It can be also insurance product, right? So for that, we have used Microsoft Azure Machine Learning Studio to implement a simple classification algorithm that would propose some types of account based on different attributes like marital status, age, gender, so on and so forth. So this was part of the experiment, but that's not the main purpose of this discussion. And now we can discuss.
But Patricia, I wanted to come back to this part, which is for me the most fascinating, is about the fact that we could have, when we did this example together, you were working on this, we could have very quickly come up with some prototype to show around with a small amount of data, and we could use a lot of component out of the box, basically. But and the most interesting part is Spatie or AWS after to replace this as the engine. Mm-hmm. When if we would go to a project with to do something for a client, can we say, hey, this part you can reuse it? It's not going to take your data from your clients, and we can really take advantage of it. And whatever this Spatie or this other library from Amazon is learning is going to improve, but it's not going to take away the data privacy of your clients and so on. And if you can reuse with another client or with another partner, they can also take advantage of what how the system is improving. Is this assumption valid to say in this way?
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, so the question is, can we reuse the dialogue to train better dialogues, right, over time?
Exactly, yes.
And yeah, the issue here is that probably we would have to ask the consent, right, of the user that his conversation might be recorded, right? Probably. Mm-hmm. By the way, this is something you have to sometimes, if you call the help desk or something like that, right, you have to accept the fact that the conversations might be recorded. So maybe that's acceptable nowadays, right, that conversations might be recorded. In this case, all the dialogues would go into a database that we could reuse later on to retrain the model. Yes.
Okay. No, because I think this is, if we would manage to bring somehow an approach for clients, they say, okay, I take advantage of it. Yes, we have to ask the consent of everybody to say, yes, for training purposes or for quality, this part of this conversation can be recorded and so on. But I think the important part is that the intent. There are some intents. They are going to be going to go into the back end of the bank, for example, because it's going to very particular areas of the conversation, like identification or whatever. And other parts are just improving because they are generic intents about that recognize that I want to open an account, that I want to have a special trading account or whatever. No, I think this is important to do that and to explain to clients. Yeah.
Okay, by the way, I forgot to mention that there's a small prototype that that is available based on what I shown on YouTube, right, by the way. Yes, so just a few remarks, right, to conclude, right, is first, for our use cases, right, in banking, insurance, regulated industries, right, full machine learning based models that are not usable as such, because we have to control really the dialogue, and we cannot just have an uncontrolled dialogue with a potential user, right? So we will be using a mix of business rules and hard-coded dialogue management, like I showed earlier. We need to keep the context and personalize the dialogue and make it relevant, obviously, right? There are a lot of new models that people are talking about, like GPT-3, T5, transformers, Jorge, that we have heard earlier from Dennis, right, a few weeks back, for example. They are quite impressive in terms of what they can do, but again, it's not going to help for the dialogue itself. It will help to, for example, compare the meaning of the sentence. I want to open an account to the sentence, I want to close the account, right? It will be probably helping to differentiate between different sentences, words and stuff and things like that, but not so much to manage the dialogue. But this will be interesting to see how these kind of models can be used in the context of chatbots or virtual assistants. So that's it. Any other question?
Yeah, no, this I think this is still something which is very interesting. For me, what it is, I think from the business perspective is, there are two takeaways here. First, how fast we can really prototype something, and how fast we can bring to a level which is much more smarter than what these people are showing in many websites in terms of chatbots, and a better quality, a better user experience. And yeah, then after that, it is something, a matter of only, of course, iterate and improve and so on. But to showcase something, it is amazing how fast we can work within less than 1 week. We can bring us something.
Exactly. I mean, if you look at the this example here, right? Amazon, right? It's quite as long as you have an idea what kind of dialogue you want to implement, right? It's relatively fast, right, to come up with a first prototype, right? As we've seen, right? You can use AWS Lex or or Luis in Microsoft Azure, or I can't remember the name, in Dialogflow, I think, in Google. So to come up with a prototype is quite fast, yeah. And if you want to make it narrow, right, not too clever, that's obviously easier than to try to make it a little bit more clever, like Michael was saying earlier, right? If somebody asks you the weather in the middle, you should not lose the context, right, and be able to come back to where you were before. and that's the tricky part. Yeah, and this is probably why, if you look at the okay, there's somebody that has raised his hands.
With Michael, I gave him. Mike, you can talk.
Yes, I'm sorry. I had to leave quickly, and I couldn't talk anymore because I got muted again when I rejoined.
Yeah, no problem. All good. So yeah, I think we just identify a few challenges, right? And that might explain why in regulated industries like banking and insurance, we don't have very clever chatbots, right? Because it's very difficult to manage the dialogue, right? To make it a bit natural, right? Because this is so strictly regulated and the domain is so narrow, it's very difficult to generalize, right? So making something about a bit smarter, it might be challenging. So I haven't seen any kind of natural chatbot in our industry so far. I mean, insurance and banking. Maybe you have, but I haven't. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, this has been really very interesting, and yeah, well, we will see if we come back with a new version of this chatbot to show something, because I think also in terms of intranet, where for corporate, this could help a lot to really people to rewrite and avoid Q&As and so on. So this is
yeah, the Q&A chatbots have their own kind of business case, right? This is a different business case, obviously, right? So, but in our case, we were trying to implement something that would replace a electronic form, right, in a kind of a natural conversation, which is much more difficult.
I have one more general question about like chatbots. If we look at consent management, because especially in regulated industries and with GDPR pretty much for everybody, that's a big topic. Would that require typically another consent from the users to use chatbots, a specific one, or is that covered with what normally is like accepted when you click on cookie, whatever banners and all these other stuff?
Yeah, in fact, Jorge asked a question, for example, can we, because if you take this example you have in front of you, right? In this case, the dialogue would not be stored anywhere, right? Which we would just keep some elements of the dialogue, right? And based on that, do an offer or whatever, right? So I guess this is the same as clicking a few boxes, right, on a web page. Now, Jorge was saying, but in order to improve the chatbot, we could store the conversations and reuse them for further training. In that case, we would really need to ask for consent, but this is the same kind of concept you might have to answer when you're calling a help desk and they are asking you if they, or notifying you that they are recording the conversation, I guess, right?
Yeah, but the European Union, Michael, they are planning to introduce the regulation that when a chatbot is present, the chatbot has to tell you, hey, I am a chatbot, I am a digital assistant, and I am talking to you. So please be aware I am not human. So this is one of the regulations that they are want to push for it. And I think this is something which will become soon in the European Union.
But I guess these tools introducing standard messages which are passed on to the user in the beginning is not a big deal.
No, I think so. I mean, we had this conversation multiple times with Jorge when we were developing this prototype, right? Because what can you store, what can't you store? But yeah, it's not so different from what you can do today on a web page when you have to answer a few questions and you click click with the mouse on a few choices, right?
Yeah, but the difference is normally if you have these web forms, in the end you have somewhere a checkbox which says by clicking the button, I agree to whatever privacy policy and so ever. Nobody reads it, but everybody agrees. In an interactive dialogue, basically would need to do that up front.
Yes, even
because
before
you
you
can't
start.
really submit at one go.
Yeah, even before you start, you would have to add for the consent, right? Probably. But anyway, I mean, this is an interesting experiment, not on to demonstrate a little bit the limits of chatbots, right? There's also a little bit of a myth, right? That we could train, we use thousands of GPUs, right? Take all the books available, then train a model on these books, and then we would come back with a fully automated virtual assistant, right, for banking, which is obviously not the case because this is such a narrow domain. So there are a lot of myths around chatbots, right, and they are still far away from really replacing a dialogue with a human, except for very small control context, I would say. Because the language is so complex, and that's the interesting part, what I would say, right? You can have just one word that is changing the complete meaning of a sentence, right? And that's still difficult to detect.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting part as well, right? Yeah. Right. Okay. So looking forward for next events, we have a lot of very interesting events in coming weeks, by the way, just to do some marketing. Very interesting speakers in the next few weeks, right? So stay tuned. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think so too.
Bye, Michael.
It is very interesting, and yeah, we need to see how we can do that, how we can build these user journeys and these dialogues in a good way. And what I'm looking for is also supporting not only like the text interaction, but then enriching that with additional material. Like, hey, you could link that to a certain image, video, whatever, if people ask, what is my best pension insurance possibility or something like that, right?
Yeah. Oh, of course, you could also, I didn't want to go too far, but, for example, the claims, you can have a picture and this kind of thing. So a lot of different things you can add, right?
Yeah. Cool. Okay, I might need your help if that conversation with our main customer continues.
Okay, happy to do so. Thank you so much.
An ex-colleague of us who has the main task to like drive interactive customer conversations, and I need to like discuss with him again. And
well, thank you. I don't, we have done a few experiments with Jorge, which we found interesting, right? But okay, hopefully we can help.
Let's see. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.